Hello, good morning everyone. How are you doing? Right, I'm very happy to be back here and trying to reconnect to schooling, even if so far it is distance schooling. Okay, so I hope everybody's okay, and I hope that you've been able to take some good rest and some relaxing moments during your holidays, and I hope that you're going globally okay. As you know, we still have a lot of uncertainties regarding what's coming next. Okay, hello everybody. I'm just doing my, traditional introduction so as to leave everybody some time to connect and get ready for this class. We still have a lot of uncertainty regarding what will happen in the next days and weeks. There are two possibilities, right? And the two possibilities are either we go back to school in early June and we still have some type of classes, some type of schooling in the school actually, or which is the other possibility, and I think it's a major possibility. Maybe the real start will be in September. So I just intend to make things clear. Hello everyone, hello everybody. I just want to make things clear that that's something I've already told you several times, but I think it's important for you to remember this. We are not working for this year. Okay, when you entered the international section, you joined because you were planning to be there for 3 years. Well, you are allowed to leave, as you know, but the aim is to stay for a 3-year period. So I shouldn't say this, but maybe we are actually lucky. Maybe we were actually lucky to be in this situation, to have 3 years, because we can keep on working, without saying, oh my goodness, what are we working for? Because the end of the year is in like 6 weeks. Okay, remember that for us it's a 3-year plan. It's not 5-year plan like in the USSR. It's a 3-year plan. So I think we should keep on working and keeping connected to learning things together. So that's my plan. That's my objective for the end of the year, whatever form it takes. So I intend to do as we did before the holidays, which is one part live streams on YouTube, so I can present you some information, maybe a kind of top-bottom presentation, something more teacher-centered, right? I give you information and I present you information. And then next week, so that's for today and tomorrow. And maybe next week, or certainly next week, we'll go back to at least one, a virtual class or a CNET platform, so we can actually exchange a bit and practice a bit on documents. Okay? So let's consider we're going to do this today, tomorrow, and next Wednesday, some live streams. So it's going to be about China and Brazil. Okay, and on next Thursday we'll be doing some kind of maybe a collective work and studying documents and so on. If you're okay with that, if you're okay with this process, I think that will be fine and possibly more efficient. Okay, right. So as it's been a long time, maybe we should reconnect to a few things, right? Before the holidays, we worked on development indicators, and we worked on how some indicators could be used for measuring, so as to measure the different levels of development of states and regions. If you remember, we focused on a various series of indicators. There was the human development indicator, there was the GDP, the gross domestic product, and there was the multi-dimensional poverty index, and so on. And what we said is that all these development indicators aimed at defining, telling two things. And that's going to be the link with my lesson today. The first thing is that development indicators are used to draw a picture of a state and a population's situation, or more exactly, the state of a population's well-being. How long they live or they can expect to live, how poor or rich a population is, how educated a population is, how well taken care of a population is in terms of health, access to medical care, and so on. This is globally what development indicators are about. Okay? The second element is that it's not just to calculate things. It's also, and that's my link, that's my point with today's lesson, okay? It's also a means for governments, a means for organizations, a means for societies to change things. And let's say, when I say change, improve them. I think change for the better normally. I mean, in itself, and that's something we've already said, in itself, it's not very useful. It's not very useful in itself to know how long a population can expect to live. It's not very useful in itself how many years of school a student may attend. All these statistics have only one aim, which is to improve the situation, to define, and that's the point, to define aims, to define objectives that you can then target. And so we've already used it using the population issues, how youthful or how aging a population is. And we've studied with Japan and Mali how governments can use this maybe to address the changes and to address the questions which are raised, which are triggered by the situation. My last part, so part one was defining indicators. My second part was studying how Japan and Mali were confronting specific population issues. Okay, that was my first and second parts. Now comes the time for my final part, which is how two countries which were facing strong development problems, and still are, but that were called underdeveloped countries half a century ago, have become emerging countries and have been able to address specific development problems. China and Brazil. You remember, that's the OIB. It means that we are more or less free to choose the case studies we have, okay? But I think it's important to have some knowledge on China and Brazil, because we will find these countries again in the OIB syllabus. These are two countries which are very often used in explaining the world problems. Okay, so I'm starting to sow a few seeds that we will certainly harvest later on. Okay, so So there is a question regarding the documents. I'm just waiting for this lesson to be totally done because I think it's easier for you, right? So once the lesson on China and Brazil is done, this geography lesson is done. We'll go back to history for the end of the year, okay? That's my last geography lesson for this year. It's going to be history for the more or less for the last weeks of the year. So once the lesson is totally completed, totally finished, I will put all the documents on Moodle like in a full lesson for you to have and keep, because we will certainly use it in the forthcoming years. Okay, that's it. Good. So as you said it, Paul Traeger, that's exactly it. It's not what we know about development and statistics. It's what we do with it. That's absolutely it. Just one piece of information for you, watchers, spectators, and actors, of course, of this lesson. As you can see, I'm using OBS, which is a software, so I can include documents in my video, and that's much easier and for you to have the documents immediately, right? But that means that the latency, the moment between the moment I speak and the moment you receive, is longer. So there is generally something like 20 to 30 seconds between the moment I speak in front of my camera and the moment you actually get the news. And so it means that when you send me messages on the chat, there is also this a moment of latency, right? So it's not that I don't want to answer your questions, but sometimes it will come with some delay for you. Okay, right? Good. So please do not hesitate to ask questions. Maybe you will wait a bit for the answers to come, okay? But I will answer your questions, of course, as I try to do all the time. Okay. So I'm going to focus on China mostly today, and I guess today and tomorrow, I guess. And maybe I will start Brazil tomorrow. So why choosing these two countries? Because these two countries have a common history in the 20th century. They're not similar at all. We see that they're very dissimilar in under many aspects, right? But they share a common history or recent history when it comes to development. They were both called third world countries in the 1950s and 60s. That means that they were underdeveloped countries. So don't worry, don't be panicked by what I'm going to show you. It's a mind map which is supposed to show you, okay, and it will be on Moodle, of course. It's a mind map that is supposed to show you when you are an underdeveloped country, when you have poor education systems, when you have a lot of poverty, when you have a low level of riches production, wealth production, industrial production, when you have a short life expectancy, why it's very difficult to get out of underdevelopment. And that's exactly what we're going to start studying today. These countries were underdeveloped countries half a century ago, about 60 years ago, 2 generations ago, as you want. So in a recent history, they were poorly developed. And what we try to study is how they managed to solve some of the problems of developments they were facing. Okay? Different problems, actually. So when you're underdeveloped, what does that mean? Sorry, I'm just going to reduce my own picture because you know me and you don't need to see me that much. Okay, right. So, okay, that's scary. That's a scary document. It's like, wow, it's everywhere. How can we read this? I'm going to explain clearly how we can use such a document. it's a very OIB document. Why? Because it's not something that reads from A to B to C, you know, in a kind of linear approach. It's a chart, it's a flow chart on which you can start almost everywhere. So let me explain you what we can do with this. And of course later we study a more easier or more accessible documents. So don't worry with this. Right, how does it work? Sorry, I'm just enlarging it a bit. Okay, good. How does it work? It works as something you should read to show all the difficulties, all the problems that countries with a low development level meet when they want to develop. If you prefer, I could say this differently and say there is something like a negative cumulative effect. It means that the more problems you have, the more problems you create. You know what I mean? There is a kind of accumulation of difficulties. Okay, let's take an example. If you're okay with that, we're starting with the top of the document. If you look at the top on the left hand side, on the top left hand side, you've got something which is the low HDI, okay? And a low HDI is something between the 0.3, 0.5 Human Development Index. You remember, the closer to 1, the better. The closer to 0, the worse and the less developed. What does that mean? It means that generally when you've got a low HDI, okay, let's follow the arrow, you have a low school attendancy and low literacy rate. That's something we've already said. But that means that you've got an unskilled or low skilled or poorly skilled population. A population which doesn't have a lot of education is poorly skilled. So it means that when you produce things, you don't have a lot of value being added. Okay, we agree with this? And then you see, if you don't produce much, you can follow the arrow on the right hand side, you have a low household revenue. If people work in low value added jobs, they have low salaries and wages. So it means that the state will collect few taxes. So if you collect few taxes, you can't have a lot of schooling. You see, all is connected. If you have few taxes, you have few infrastructures, few schools, few hospitals, few transportation, few communication networks, and so on. So I'm not going to read this. I'm going to keep this for you to understand how we can analyze the problems of accumulating problems. What I mean is that, and that's the point. Remember, you are not students, you are learning geographers, and you should think problems in terms of how can we solve them. I'm going to put this differently if you're okay with that. If you look at this chart, an underdeveloped or a poor, today we wouldn't say underdeveloped, we would say less developed. When you're a less developed country, where should you start? Among all these problems, where should you start? Where should you start solving problems to start a development process? You see, that's the point. And you can see, you can understand why it's a political question. Because it is the role of governments to create the conditions for development to start. Okay? So, I just leave you a few seconds to watch this. But I just would like to show you that some problems do not depend only on the country. Can you please watch the right-hand side of the chart? And on the right-hand side of the chart, there is something which is called few inward foreign direct investment. Let me explain you very quickly what it is. We will need it for China. FDI, foreign direct investment, is when a country is receiving economic investments by either foreign countries or foreign companies. What does that mean? I give you a precise example. When Renault, the French car manufacturing company, decided to build factories in Brazil to produce cars there, it was a foreign direct investment because Renault is a French company investing in Brazil. So for Brazil, that was a foreign investment, a foreign direct investment. When Amazon opened a company and warehouses and distribution centers in Saran, Loiret, wonderful place, it was an American direct investment, a foreign direct investment in France. Okay? That's clear? Is this definition okay with you? So it means that if you want to develop as a country, receiving foreign investment is important. And you can understand that it's not something that depends on you only. It's also depending on how companies from the rest of the world or banks from the rest of the world will invest in your country. Okay? So, to put it in a nutshell, and that's something, if you're taking some notes, this is the moment to take an important note. It will be in the lesson, but that's the key point. For a country to develop, for a country to adapt a specific strategy of development, okay, for a country to adopt a specific strategy of development, it means that you need to take into account two things. Firstly, what is the situation of your population? What is the situation of your state? The infrastructures, the schools, the natural conditions, whatever. Okay. And what can you do immediately on this? How can you solve problem immediately because you're the government or you're a decision taker? That's the first point. But also, you have to take into account a global context. How can the rest of the world, if you want, or how can foreign countries or how can international and transnational companies intervene in this development process? Is that clear? Development strategy is a matter of domestic choices and a matter of international influence because we live in a globalized world. And so what I would like to show you is that China, I will take two examples. China has made the choice of opening to the world, and opening to the world was the key of China's development. There was a choice, it dates back to the 1970s and 1980s. There was a political choice made by the Chinese government, the communist government, to open China's economy to the world. And that was the root of China's success, because China's development has been a major success. For Brazil, the results are a bit more mitigated, okay? And Brazil has adopted recently more domestic policies to reduce poverty. So, I know it's a long introduction, right? It's been like almost 25 minutes, but what I want you to understand is that I'm going to insist, I'm not going to talk about all the strategies of development for China and Brazil, of course. We don't have 10 years in front of us, but I will insist on how China has chosen to open to the world for its development and how successful it's been, even if there are still problems of development in China. I'm not naive on this, but globally, it's been a major success. And for Brazil, we'll see that it's based mostly on internal decision, domestic decision, and that Brazil's priority is to reduce poverty. And so far, China has been much more efficient than Brazil to reduce poverty, and we see this. Okay? That's the structure of the presentation I will do. Okay. Right. So, regarding your questions, it's not really a guideline if you're talking about the chart I've shown you, but it's more. I'm just going to show it again, because I think it's better if you have it in front of your mind, in front of your eyes. Sorry, in front of your mind too, possibly. But okay, sorry for this. Good. Right. It's not a guideline, but it's more a way to, that's where to start the strategy from. I give you one example. To answer your question. There are problems you can solve and problems which are harder to solve. If you take this flow chart and you look at the right-hand side, okay, there is something called physical constraints, landlocked territories, distances. If you have no access to the sea, this is exactly what a landlocked territory is. If you have no access to the sea, that's not something you're going to change. Unless you want to conquer and make war and conquer new territories, you can do that. When you are Switzerland, you're not going to change one thing, you are landlocked. When you are Niger or Mali, you're not going to change this, you are landlocked. Okay? When you are Nepal, you're not going to change the fact that you are in the Himalaya mountains, and this is a specific physical constraint. So, it means that, of course, this is not going to be maybe your priority. Your priority is to focus on other elements, because you will have to take into account that this physical constraint won't change anytime soon. Same thing if you live in a region which is not stable. That's the bottom line. If you look, no or low regional and global influence plus instability. When you live in a region where your neighbor countries, your border states are at war, that's not going to be something you can change. So it's not exactly a guideline. It's more a way to say, how can we make a hierarchy? How can we prioritize? Where we act? Because, for example, if you take the central box, I'm going to conclude on this, but if you take the central box, which is low integration in global trade, okay? How can you integrate better in global trade? There may be different strategies, okay? If you have a lack of infrastructures, schools, hospitals, transport and communication, this is something you can maybe address more directly. It's easier for a state to build schools than to stop the war in your border state. You know what I mean? So it's not a guideline, it's, let's be a bit a poet, it's a field of possibility. You can take any box on this picture and start somewhere and say, okay, let's address one or two of these issues. It's more a way to prioritize. So it's a guideline, of course, but it's not, it's not exactly like having a washing machine and you just have to follow the lines and it works. It's more, where could we start? Okay, as a state or as a government or as an organization. Okay, right? This is where states can act. This is where international organizations like the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the UNICEF can start. Okay? Right? Good. So now, let's, after this long introduction, this is why I will certainly take 1 more hour tomorrow on China. Okay? Right. Good. Let's get there. That's a text which dates back to 2014, but it's still very useful to understand the specificity of the Chinese situation. And the specificity of the Chinese situation is that China is currently the second economy in the world. When you look at how much wealth China is producing, the GDP of China, okay, it is the second in the world. And it is second only to the USA. And many economists say that China will overtake the US economy in possibly 10 years, 15 years, in a short term. When you are young adults, in a few years, China will certainly be the wealthiest economy in the world. I'm not saying that all the Chinese will be the wealthiest people, but that China will produce the highest wealth in the world. Okay? That's clear? But in the meantime, China still suffers from very massive inequalities of development. Very massive inequalities of development. This is a map which was provided by the World Health Organization, okay, Organisation Mondiale de la Santé for us, right? And I like this map because, as you can see, it is using one of the development indicators that we know well, which is the life expectancy. It's the life expectancy. And we know it's very important because life expectancy is telling you about the quality of health standards in a country. The higher health standards are, the higher life expectancy is. And it does not only depend on doctors or hospitals or medical care, it also tells you about the environment. Is the environment creating, diseases and so on? It's telling you about the food supply. Is the population well fed? Okay. It's also telling you about the industrial accidents, the working conditions. Do a lot of people die while they're working? Life expectancy is a very complete, a very interesting indicator for this matter. So this is China. And what I also find interesting is that you don't have only the age, you don't have only the life expectancy, but you have a comparison with other countries in the world. So it means that for each province, as you may know, China is divided into provinces and districts and so on. You have a comparison with another country in the world. How do you read this? You read that, for example, if you take the province in the northwest, the Xinjiang province, right? So sorry for Chinese speakers behind their screens. I know there are some Chinese speakers behind the screen. I'm sorry for my poor Mandarin pronunciation, right, and Chinese pronunciation. In Xinjiang, right, you've got the same life expectancy as in Algeria. This is how you should read the map. And as you can see, it is apparently a shorter life expectancy than in the rest of the country. The life expectancy is between 71 and 73. On the contrary, if you go, for example, to Hong Kong, and that's on the southeast of China, okay, you can see it. You know that Hong Kong is a city. It's a city province, right? You've got the same life expectancy as in Germany. So if you compare, it means that depending on the place where you live in China, depending on the province where you live in China, possibly depending on whether you live in the country or you live in the rural place, your life expectancy, how many years you can expect to live, may have a 10-year gap. A 10-year gap. Actually, the lowest currently is in Tibet. So as you can see, Tibet is in the south, or more, it's in the west. It's not the south. It's in the west of China. It has a specific political status. I won't develop on this, but and in this part, life expectancy is below 70. It is approximately 68 or 69. Okay? So you live in Hong Kong, your life expectancy is more than 80. You live in Tibet, your life expectancy is below 70. Actually, it's a 12-year gap. So that proved that development in China is quite unequal. But now, look at the bottom left-hand side of the map. The bottom left-hand side on the map is here. It's this one. And it's showing you how life expectancy has increased approximately for the last 30 years. So the map stops in 2013, but globally the tendency has remained the same. And if you look at this, you can see that the situation was much, much worse in 1990. How should you read this map? Tibet is on the west, and it's the darkest. It's the reddest province on this map. It means that between 1990 and 2013, the life expectancy in Tibet has increased by more than 12 years. I've just told you that it was 68 or 69 today. It means that it was 55 or 56 30 years ago. So that proved that China's life expectancy has undergone a major leap, a major boom, a major progress and improvement since the 1990s. Let's go back to the text I've shown you, because it's going to summarize exactly the type of problem that China is meeting, right? Sorry, I would like to get rid of this one. Okay. I'm sorry. it's blocking from time to time. Okay, good. So, firstly, we know that China has installed policies and has made policies, right, which, I'm sorry for this, it's just blocked, right, sorry, I'm still improvising to some extent on this one, and I would like to get rid of this document. Here we are, okay, good. To be more efficient, sorry, I've just lost a bit of my direction here. To be more efficient, we need to see where did China start from? What was China's situation 50 or 60 years ago? What has China achieved? What is the current situation of China? And so, what were the processes? What were the policies? What were the choices made by China to achieve these aims? And of course, the question, because it's a geography lesson and not a history lesson, is what could China do now to keep on improving its development policies? Okay, let's read this, if you're okay with that. In September 2014, President Barack Obama, the US president at that time, addressed the United Nations General Assembly, and he called for countries to shoulder more international responsibility. Barack Obama was a president who said that the world problems, the world issues, could only be solved, yes, only if all the major countries in the world acted together, not as individual countries, but as a collective force. It's called multilateralism. So he went to the United Nations and said, we need all the energies, we need all the responsibilities, we need all the great countries, the big powers to act. Chinese President Xi Jinping was home in Beijing. That day, Xi conducted a seminar at Beijing's Great Hall of the People, a ceremonial building, in celebration of the 2565th birthday of Confucius and its resonance to today. This paragraph is a way to remember that China is currently one of the longest existing country in the world. That China had institutions and existed as China already more than 2,500 years ago. And President Xi said, we will strive for the peaceful development of the world. But he also reminded his audience that China was still a developing country and that its responsibility should be commensurate with its status. So the president of China himself, 6 years ago, and we'll see that things have changed a bit since then, but 6 years ago, President of China said, we are still a developing country. But is it true? Second paragraph. Is China still a developing country? Is it the case? China's top leaders certainly think so. Or at least they say so publicly. In many, if not all of his meetings with foreign leaders, Xi, like his predecessor Hu Jintao, reminds them that China is a developing country and thus must behave accordingly. But it's unclear what that means. Statistically and domestically, the idea of China as a developing country makes sense. Both the World Bank is an institution, remember, that lends money to states in difficulty, and the International Monetary Fund. The International Monetary Fund can help financially countries, and they also try to balance the world economy. They try to balance the monetary relations between countries. Okay, they classify China, so they're both depending on the United Nations. Okay, their institutions in the United Nations, and they both classify China as a developing country. China, with a per capita income of about $600 and $500 per person, is still well below the cutoff that distinguishes developing economies from their high-income counterparts, said the chief economist for World Bank. Almost 200, that's the important quotation, almost 250 million Chinese, that is 1/6 of the population, still live on less than $2 a day. So it means that you still have 1 Chinese out of 6 which lives below poverty levels. China is a dualistic economy with very affluent cities and coastal regions, but also very poor regions that by any standard would be classified as developing areas. Then, as now, the Chinese response has been to claim that domestic poverty eradication, the Chinese poverty eradication is their paramount responsibility. It means that above anything else, China should reduce its own poverty. And that's very important. Look at this final sentence. I think it's quite true. The only role China can play in international affairs is the role of a large developing nation. If we continue to lift 1.3 billion people out of poverty, isn't that the best thing that we can do to help the rest of the world? I really like this sentence because when you are China or when you're India, you remember this, that's something I've already said too. China and India, they stand for 1/3 of the world. Okay, the Chinese population is almost 4 billion. The Indian population is 1.2, 1.3 billion. So both China and India, they have a 2.7 billion population. That's 1 human out of 3. Okay? If you want to compare, the French population, the population currently living in France, is only 1% of the world population. Otherwise, it means that the French population is nothing in the world, whereas the Chinese and Indian population, the Chinese population is 1 human out of 6. Okay? So it's very interesting to see that we need to focus on development in China, because development in China is not only development in China. Development in China is development for 1 human out of 6. So, you should not get interested in what's happening in China, not just because it's a geography class and you will have exams possibly on it one day and so on. You need to focus on what's happening in China, because what happening in China is happening in the world and is weighing a specific weight and having a specific influence in the world. Okay? If I go back to I don't know if that's clear. Am I clear here? Yes? Please do not hesitate to say if it's either going too fast or staying too vague or whatever, right? Because I don't want to... My aim is not to speak alone in front of my screen, I'm not that mad yet, like speaking to myself about China. So please do not hesitate to ask questions or say if it's clear or not. A way to prove that the sentence which goes, China, it's the last paragraph again. China is a dualistic economy with very affluent cities and coastal regions, but also some very poor regions that by any standards would be classified as developing areas. If we go back to the map about the life expectancy, which I have to downsize a bit. Okay, if you go back there, we can see it. For example, I'm sorry. Right. For example, if you look at the center, of the map, okay, and the central provinces, you can see the name of countries with the same life expectancy. Brazil, that's for Kansu in the north. Guatemala, that's for the center, which is Qinghai. Paraguay for Sichuan province. But Guatemala, for example, to stay on this one, Guatemala is a country from Central America, and it's clearly a developing country. Guatemala is one of the poorest countries on the American continent. Okay? If you go a bit to the east, you will see the province of Henan, and it has the same life expectancy as Ecuador, which is also a developing country from Latin America. Right? If you go a bit south, you will see the Quechua province, and that's the same life expectancy as Cambodia, which is one of the poorest or least developed country in Eastern Asia. And in the meantime, you can recognize other countries like United States, Malta, Ireland, Britain, Germany, I've already mentioned. But it means that when you live in the center of China, your standards of living seem to be more or less the ones that you will find in a poor country in Central America. Okay? So, why is that? Why is this situation, the current situation in China? And to explain this, and that's going to be my conclusion for today, I would like to show you a document which I found and is quite interesting. And it's about, I'm just... Right, this one. Okay. This document that I will show you and then I will zoom in. Okay, that's the entire document, right? I found it on a site called Visual Capitalism, okay, or Visual Capitalist, and it's actually using very great visual documents. So I think it's an interesting source. The document itself is divided into a series of columns and facts. So it's going to be on Moodle right today. I will put this so you can watch it if you want before tomorrow more precisely. Firstly, it's showing you the various presidents who used to rule over China. So starting at the bottom with Mao Zedong, okay, and going up to Xi Jinping today. And you can see a graph, okay? You can see a bar graph. And the bar graph is the GDP per capita. I'm just going to zoom in a bit. The bar graph is the GDP per capita in China, okay? And so the unit is there. If you look at it's a graph, so if you look at the x-axis at the bottom, you can see the GDP, okay? It's a specific GDP, it's GDP with purchasing power parity. So it's a different calculation of the GDP, but we don't care. Globally, it means how much wealth is each Chinese producing. With this chart, we can see that today China has a GDP per person of approximately $16,000 per inhabitant. Okay, where did it start? When Mao took power in 1949, the Chinese GDP per inhabitant was less than 1,000. It was $800 per inhabitant. Today it's 16,000. I let you do the calculation. I'm sure you're very good at math. It means that the GDP per inhabitant of China has been multiplied by 20 since China has become the People Republic of China, so the Communist China under Mao Zedong rule and his successors. As you know, the GDP is one of the major development indicators. Can you please keep this in mind for tomorrow? Chinese development indicator regarding wealth, the GDP per inhabitant in purchasing power parity, GDP PPP, has been multiplied by 20 since the 1970s. And what is very interesting in this chart, and we won't read it fully, but is that it's explaining you the different policies chosen by the Chinese government. So you've got the political decision, government taking political decisions and international decisions, diplomacy and so on. You've got the economic and social decisions that were taken. I just give you one example. Look at this date. Sorry. My bad. If you look at the center of the charts here, there is a date, which is the 4 modernization. Okay, I don't know if you can see this. It's the center of you can see this picture of many people, raising their fist and so on. The woman raising her fist in the foreground. And just left of it, you can see 4 modernizations. And that more or less corresponds to the moment when Mao Zedong was declining and he died immediately after, before he was replaced by a man called Deng Xiaoping. What were the 4 modernizations? It was a political decision taken by the political leaders in China to modernize 4 sectors: agriculture, industry, science and technology, and the army. And many historians, many economists, many specialists of China say that that's the key moment. That's the game changer. That's the turning point in Chinese development. This is the moment when China's strategies of development started producing effects on the population. And if you look at this, you can see that if you look at the bar, at the chart on the left, okay, you can see that after the 4 modernizations, suddenly there was a boom in the GDP of China. So what we're going to do tomorrow, because time is up for today. I have a class at 10 with another group. What you need to understand for today is this. Political decisions, choices of development made by a government actually affect the level of development, sometimes positively, sometimes negatively. But China is certainly the best example, of how political decisions and decisions taken by a government with a strategy, with an agenda, with a view, with a master plan, we can call this, can actually really accelerate development. Because if you look at the bottom of the graph, it's very clear. Whatever you think, let's make things clear. Whatever you think of the Chinese government, whatever you think of its capacity for secrecy and its, political organization, right? And being an authoritarian government, look at this chart. In terms of economic and social development, what China has achieved is more than impressive. It's almost never seen before in history. So tomorrow, I will analyze 3 decisions taken by China, which have been factors in helping China develop their demographic policies, the one-child policy. But I will be very fast on this one because it's important, but not as much. The 4 modernizations, how China decided to inject money into specific sectors, and something called the special economic zones to attract foreign companies coming to China, and how today this has produced effects on Chinese development. Okay? Yep. Good. I'm done for today. Thank you for coming and joining. And let's meet tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Okay, I said 2 o'clock or 1:45. I can't remember. Anyway, whatever I've told you on the message, I'll be there at that time. Okay, right? That's clear for you? Okay, good. I really have to let you go now because I've got another class coming. Okay, so if you're okay with that, we'll meet tomorrow at 1:45 or 2. I can't remember. Right? If you have any question in between, please do not hesitate to send an email or a message. Okay? Right? That's fine. Have a nice day, all of you, and see you tomorrow.